Hey guys, this is Crap Hunter, and welcome back to World of Tanks. Woo! And welcome to not only patch 9.6, but also the review of the KV-85. I think also this is the first review of patch 9.6, so huzzah! Random trivia for the win. Anyway, today's video we're going to be focusing on this machine, the KV-85, the replacement of the KV-1S at tier 6. In the tech tree, she stands here, next to, well, along the line with the T150 and the KV-2. But, unlike the KV-2 and the T150, you actually have to go through two tier 5s in order to reach the KV-85. Now, for those of you who are going through World of Tanks and have not played before patch 9.3 and are sort of making their way through, grinding up and everything, you've gone through two tier 5s because you know how you've heard from your mates how good the IS tank is. So you're on this particular vehicle. You've just spent 28,000 research points and 900,000 credits purchasing this vehicle. The question will obviously be on your mind: is she worth it? Now, a short answer is yes and no. The long answer, which hopefully which will be part of the review, is, in my own personal opinion, I feel the KV-85 is going to always have its bad side highlighted more than its good side. And this is because it's what I'm going to call the replacement tank for the KV-1S. I might make a couple of references here and there, but it is pretty much the replacement of the KV-1S. For those of you who haven't played World of Tanks before 9.3, the very famous KV-1S was a Russian tier 6 heavy tank with a ridiculously good 122mm D25T gun. This was the thing that made it famous, or infamous, depending on what side of the fence you were on. And many players hated it. They felt the tank was overpowered. They felt they could never kill it. In my personal opinion, I never found the vehicle to be a big threat. In fact, I enjoyed fighting KV-1Ss, because when I had the SU-152, or the KV-2, I was able to one-shot these pretty effectively. So really, these things aren't they weren't that efficient in combat. It was just, unfortunately, people didn't spend time learning how to kill them. Each to their own. So anyway, Wargaming finally said, right, that's it, we've had enough, we'll change the KV-1S and nerf it to buggery. And as such, we have this result. Now, the KV-85 isn't a bad, nerfed tank, but the problem is how it's structured. It will, as I said, it will highlight the bad side of these features. You know, the tank itself, as I said, there are good bits to this tank, and when there are good bits, they are pretty good. But the sad thing is, because of what dogma this tank, the dogma around this tank, or this particular tier of tank, has, the KV-85 definitely has flaws, and unfortunately in this it does have them, and it kind of feels a lot worse, and is worse than its good side. How bad would you say it is? Well, let's have a look in the review to find out. So, hit points, what do you have? You have 870. Now this is actually quite an improvement over the KV-1S at tier 6, as that vehicle only had 810, so 60 hit points extra. This is pretty nice. It kind of pushes you more towards average, more being able to actually take a hit, whereas with other games where if you took one hit from a higher tier vehicle, you were pretty much crippled for the rest of the match. But how does this fare in against your counterparts? Oops, zoom in for dramatic effect. Anyway, so let's start with the Le Français. The ARL-44, I don't own it, but I've killed it enough to say that this vehicle, when fully upgraded, has 820 hit points. So no longer is the Tier 6 Russian Heavy of KV-1S/KV-85 being laughed at by the French. Huzzah! But Germany kind of turns around and slaps you one, as she has the VK-3601H Heavy with 950 hit points. Ow. So, yeah, not as good. Not as good, sorry to say. But how about the British? Well, okay, once again, the British are indomitably strong with their very strong vehicles. This vehicle has 950, which is the Churchill Mark 7. So, this is the stock, by the way, for any of you new guys, this is all the stock values of a vehicle. So if you're ever wondering why, that's why. So, unfortunately, the British once again do quite a lot of damage. What about the Americans? Well, the M6 is actually surprising, as this vehicle only has 870 when fully upgraded. So this vehicle is the same as you. So that's one vehicle you can chip up to. And your counterparts, Well, this vehicle, I believe, still has the 860, I believe. So not as good as you, but just a bit. And the T150, which has 880, meaning that you aren't actually very high at all on the hit points list. But you're not as bad as you used to be. I mean, as the Tier 6 Heavy goes, it's not the greatest amount of hit points at all, but considering what we're going to be going on to next, you'll kind of understand why. But yeah, the KV-85 doesn't really enjoy a generous dose, but it certainly enjoys a good enough dose to make it more potent against, say, Tier 7 and 8 counterparts. Now, onto weight and horsepower. You weigh 46.52 tons with all 3 equipment modules attached, and you have a maximum tonnage limit of 49 tons. This, in combination with your 600 horsepower engine, gives you a relatively okay 34 km per hour top speed. It's alright. Like, I can't really say anything else about it apart from it used to be better, but now it's not. You are slightly slower than your counterpart at Tier 5. Unfortunately, I'm just going to put that down towards having a bigger turret and gun. And also because back in the day, I'm going to make a lot of references, by the way, to the KV-1S back in the day, because you can't help but compare, because it's like, you see this vehicle and you think, oh, this thing used to be so good, and then it's like, no. So anyway, like I was saying, the KV-1S back in the day had the amazing ability of darting in and out of cover without any too much of issue, and also could turn relatively on a dime, which meant even medium tanks of the, Tier 4 or 7 or whatever had issue with this vehicle. So yeah, this thing isn't as mobile as it used to be, and although it's got a pretty healthy 30 degrees of turning, that's more for when you're trying to pivot on the spot to try and react to someone, more than actually being able to flank. So while it's not a bad for mobility, it still retains its niche. I'm slightly more mobile than the average heavy tank. It still doesn't retain as much as you perhaps hope, so it's alright, it's average. It does the job, but it doesn't really leap out against anything else. Now, on to armor. If you haven't noticed it already, the KV-85 doesn't really improve much, if any, armor. It seems to be a habit with some of the vehicles I review. They don't seem to improve much, do they? The KV-85's hull armor is just the same as the KV-1S. 75 to the front, 60 to the sides, 60 to the rear. Most of it flat. The turret, which is the only actual improvement of the vehicle, has 100 to the front, 90 to the sides, 90 to the rear. But the problem is, it's very flat. Unless you're facing it, it's flat. Which means any kind of high explosive, any kind of side shot, generally will penetrate, with regardless of what kind of position you are. If you're showing your side, you'll get penned. And God forbid you ever go up against an SU-152 with a derp, or the ISU with a derp, or the KV-2. Your counterpart can easily one-shot you. That's a worrying thought, isn't it? Maybe with your extra hit points you might be safe, but it can still one-shot you. So, unfortunately, this thing sacrifices its armor for mobility, but the mobility isn't good, so it doesn't really help you out on this one. How much does it not help you out? Well, let's go on to Tank Inspector to find out. So, here we are on Tank Inspector. Here is the KV-85, and here are the KV-85's armor values. Now, unlike the KV-1S, the KV-85 does benefit from a more sloped turret. So, going down from the list as usual, the 100mm of frontal armor on the turret does what it says on the tin. There we go. English work for me. The frontal cheeks of the turret will provide you with a very decent 100mm. Only around the gun mantlet will you have about 100mm flattish. But the one benefit to the frontal facing of this turret is as such that if you shoot and hit the KV-1S frontally from beyond these little hook things here, you are guaranteed to bounce off, as obviously it'll just be like doink, and that'll be it. Nothing will happen. You may get a lucky penetration here-ish, but more often than not it'll probably just bounce off the side and you will have wasted a shot and he can shoot you. So pretty good for the frontal half of the turret. Another benefit, of course, is the side 90mm. Once again, if the enemy is showing your front, you're guaranteed to penetrate, guaranteed to ricochet off that. But, unfortunately, when you see the side of the KV-85, very little to no angling whatsoever, so you are guaranteed to penetrate and do damage. There is a benefit, though, that your commander's cupola is actually given 90mm of armor as well. It's not much, but considering how big it is, it's quite nice to know that that has the same level of armor as the side of your turret, so thumbs up for that one. Now, for those of you who have seen my KV-1S review, you'll no doubt know what is exactly going to happen next, which is regards to the hull armor. So going down the list, you'll have the same 75mm worth of frontal armor, only going at the top of the vehicle, as well as a tiny strip which is highlighted in game with this little bump here between the hooks. See that there? And it only provides a minuscule amount of angling with its very flattish sides, so most shells will definitely penetrate and potentially one-shot you if they're high explosive. The little armoured strip at the front will potentially save you from any other shots if you're encountering tier 4 vehicles and rather shite tier 5 guns, but generally speaking, no, it's not really going to do anything. It's just going to act as a, hey, shoot me target. Further down the list, you'll also notice this as well, the little 65mm worth of armor, which does admittedly have a fair amount of angling onto it, so it does the job. But once again, it might save you, it probably won't. It might just end up bouncing that, which goes into that, which then still penetrates. But still, it's an improvement over the underside. Now, going to the 60mm of armor to the sides and rear also covers the under glacis, giving it an extra 15mm worth of armor. Now, you do also get, unfortunately though on the side, you get the same reaction and stuff as last time. Flat sides, no angling whatsoever. If a HE shot from a KV-2, an SU-152, or artillery, God forbid, hits that and pens, you're dead. Most likely, you are dead. No chance for survival, it'll pen, unless it's a bullshit RNG, it'll most definitely pen, killing you instantly or giving you a rather nasty headache. Same for the rear as well, very little to no angling whatsoever. If it pens, you're dead. Going to the 50mm of armor, it actually, you get this little sort of note here, which gives you, admittedly fairly enough, it does give you an extra 30mm of armor, but it doesn't count for much. So, benefits, definitely got a benefit. Even if you go slightly higher, you're getting about 85, 86, maybe even 87 on the extreme corner, but generally speaking, 80mm of extra armor is what you'll receive from the little 50mm at the front. Now, there we go, relocate the gun, there we go. So the next bit of armor, which is rather hilarious, is actually underneath the turret. It's 45mm, which, if we just turn the turret actually, there we go. Which, if you could see, completely pointless, almost not worth mentioning, but yeah, it's underneath the turret. So if something bounces off and hits the underside from a flat angle, you'll probably have problems, and also be impressed. I'll be impressed if that happens. Then, of course, you've got the 40mm at the top here, which, once again, if we move the turret, you'll see it's a very much flat, for mainly artillery purposes. And then you've got your 35, which I think, you'll laugh, is actually that. Just ever so, I don't know, I don't quite know where it is, whether it's an underside of another turret or an underside of a gun. But yeah, somewhere around here, which I suspect is that somewhere, like those little black bits, because if you don't mention it, it's not there. So that's another thing you've got to keep an eye out for. And then finally, you've got this 30mm of armor, which obviously the top of the cupola, as well as the turret, as well as the engine deck, completely flat. If artillery hits, you die. So yeah, armor-wise, the only real benefit that this thing has over the previous tank is its turret. Otherwise, if you've driven the KV-1S, you'll know what to do with this vehicle's hull armor, but you now do have a slight benefit of having a better turret than the KV-1S. Now, onto view range and signal range. You are Russian, so naturally you're never going to have a good view range and signal range, but you do have a slight improvement over the KV-1S, this being the 340 versus the previous one, which was 330. So it's certainly nothing to brag about. It's still quite poor in comparison to your counterparts, but it's slightly better than it was before. Unfortunately, you are still laboured with the very much terrible 440 signal range 10 RK radio. Let's see how you compare to your counterparts. So let's start with the French. The ARL-44 with the top turret has 350 view range, so 10 better than you, and unfortunately they also can upgrade to having the SCR radio, which gives them 750 signal range, so unfortunately they do whoop you a rather nasty amount. For Deutschland, the VK3601H with a top turret gives them 370 view range, so quite a nasty hit, and of course they have the FUG-12, which gives them 710 signal range, so unfortunately for both France and Germany you do kind of suck a bit. The Churchill Mark 7 with a top turret does get 360 view range, so not as good as Germany, but certainly better than France, and their radio, top radio, tier 8, gives them 550 signal range, so not as good as France and Germany in certain parts, but still better than you. The M6 with the top turret gets 350 view range, same as the French, but the radio is actually kind of poor this time, being only at 480, but still it is 40 meters better than you. And finally we come to your counterparts. The T150 actually has worse view range than you, being at 330, and the 10 RK radio, which is the same, and the same goes for the KV-2, if we have a look-see, the MT2 turret, 330 view range, and has the 10 RK radio. So you're still quite low in the regards to you are low, bottom of the list style when it comes to view range and signal range. But that said, that's the trait of Russian vehicles. You never really can ever be a good scouting heavy. It never happens at all. So, I mean, depending of course on the map you're on, sometimes it doesn't really matter. But for the larger maps like El Haluf or Muravanka, or maybe even now Muravanka's the one with the... Yeah, so Malinovka, there we go. So other maps like that. And of course, the 1,000 meter Muravanka can present some issues when it comes to remembering or trying to see which is going on the other flank. So this can be quite an issue. Now, onto the guns. When the KV-1S was in action, the one thing I think that most people remember about that vehicle in particular was its 122mm high-velocity D25T gun. In all fairness, it was one of the things that made it so popular. Its maneuverability was nice, and the track traverse was nice, and okay, you know, it's okay-ish armor. You could still get killed by it, but still, it was really the gun. No one really remembers anything else about it. It was the gun. And the gun did serve immensely well. It presented not only an ability for low-tier tanks to get obliterated in one shot, but also presented a relatively decent challenge for even tier 8 vehicles. So, naturally, most people either hated it or loved it, depending on what side of the fence you were on. Now, obviously when Wargaming came in to try and nerf the vehicle, they had a pretty nasty, challenge ahead of them. I mean, don't forget, this is the vehicle that most players utilized in Tier 6, and as such, you don't really want to smack the people who utilize this gun too much, otherwise they'll just feel like the company hates them. But then again, you can't give them a okay-ish tank which still does as well as it used to, only in a different name and different style. So what Wargaming did with the KV-85 over the KV-1S is they made the top gun, which you can still research. When you go into the tech tree, and weirdly enough, I would definitely recommend you research this, because the gun itself actually is available on multiple vehicles. You get it in the IS at this one, you get it the IS-3 as a stock gun. If you go to the tech tree and go to the KV-3, you can research the D25T, and it is also an option for the KV-4, so it's not a bad idea to research it. But how Wargaming dealt with the D25T is as such. Let's have a little look at the model. In my opinion, also a lot uglier than it used to be. But what the Wargaming have done is they've made it as effective in certain cases of combat as a derp on a 100mm derp on a tier 5 tank. Not exactly like a derp gun, but in a sense how effective it is in combat as a tier 5 derp gun. It still has the 175mm worth of penetration and the 390 alpha, but everything else about this particular gun is god awful. Very, very low rate of fire at 3 rounds a minute. An absolutely shocking 0.5 on accuracy, and a very, very terrible 3.6 aiming time. Now, I actually did try utilizing this gun in combat, and yes, I did get a couple of hits and penetrations, but I never ever got over 1,000 hit points in damage at the end of any game when utilizing this gun. This gun is basically to catch the newer players out and make them think that this thing is the best gun on the tank, and that the gun that they really want you to use, which is this gun, is worse. This is just crap. It is utter garbage. I'm sorry. Anyone who likes this gun, you're going to struggle with this gun. On other vehicles, it's probably fine. This vehicle in particular, god-awful. It's just god-awful. For a couple of reasons as well. Not just the stats, but we'll get onto the other reason in a minute. So, with regards to this gun in particular is just designed to make anyone driving this particular tank loathe it even more. What Wargaming then decided to do with the other gun, which is this gun, is actually give it a fair enough chance to actually make you see that this gun is far greater than this gun. And in comparison, stats-wise, I'm not going to blame them. I mean, if we have a look, this is the S34, you can see, okay, so it's not as powerful, it's only got 100mm versus 122, it's got a much better firing rate of 7.89 rounds per minute, or reload, which is about 6.8 seconds, 6.87 seconds, not 100% crew mind, versus the 18.08, nearly 20 seconds versus 6, so that's another good thing. Okay, so less penetration than the D25T's 175, but it's only 5 less. 250 versus 390, but considering how many times you can fire this thing over that, you probably could do twice as much, if not double. And of course, the 0.38 accuracy and a 2.7 second aiming time versus 0.5 and a 3.6. So naturally, this gun is the option, the only option if you want to effectively utilize this vehicle in combat. Now, stats-wise, I can't really say anything about this gun that's bad. In my opinion, this is the best gun for the vehicle. It's also the most useful, fun to work with. It does occasionally troll you a bit, but that said, that is Russian RNG. That is RNG for you. There are occasions where some shots will just miss completely, but stats-wise, this gun is good. Now, the reason why I say stats-wise is because there's one major flaw which affects both this gun, and probably this gun as well, which is the gun depression. The gun depression on this particular vehicle is god awful. It's the worst gun depression on a heavy tank I have ever seen. The Chinese are probably going to have better gun depression than this thing. Now, unfortunately, I can't show you in the garage, but I hopefully can show you enough in actual combat during the replays. But trust me when I say this thing offers you about 5 degrees of gun depression. Basically, tilting your head slightly downwards is the same amount of gun depression that this thing has. It's that crap. And it's exactly the same, if not slightly worse, for this thing, which is why the rate of fire, the accuracy, and aiming time is made even worse because you can't even point it down. So this does mean that your role as a heavy tank is probably more relegated to if you are supporting someone's attack and potentially can flank around the sides so that you don't, and also you're on flat ground, or you can shoot from further away. The gun elevation isn't that good either, giving you about, I'd say, 30 degrees, maybe slightly under 40, but certainly you can't shoot the Luftwaffe down. you can't point it up to the sky. You literally, you can point to the horizon, but not the sky. So, yeah, I would say out of all the features of this tank that annoy me, the gun itself, like the KV-1S, is the worst feature about this particular tank. But if it wasn't for the fact that the tank had a god-awful gun depression, I would say that the gun itself is adequate, if not perfect, for the role of what you need to do. But yeah, the gun itself, gun depression-wise, is shit. It is absolutely shocking. Now, onto crew skills and equipment. This is basically where I talk to you guys about what stuff to put on your tank to make it awesome, and what crew skills you need to make it epic. So, let's start with the equipment. The first two things you need to have, obviously, are vents and rammer. These two, just no excuse, you have them. The third option is, as always, up to you, but I can present you with 2, maybe 3 options if you are absolutely desperate to make this thing even more effective. First option, well, number 1 recommendation would be the enhanced gun laying drive. The 2.7 second aiming time, the 2.7 second aiming time on the 100mm S34 is alright, and you know, if utilized outside of combat, it can still be used, it's still quite effective. But if you are determined to have a good aiming time, a good sight line on your target, then I definitely recommend to grab it. If you're not too fussed about getting the aiming time down to a T, then maybe definitely second option would be a heavy spore liner, as unfortunately you haven't really got much, if any, armor at all, and unfortunately most of them is flat as hell. Artillery will obviously love to go for you, as well as any high explosive vehicles, so an extra protection for your crew as well as explosions and ramming will definitely, you know, it's definitely going to be utilized well. The third option, which personally I don't think is a good idea, but still it can be useful in an emergency, is a toolbox, which allows you to have an extra 25% to your repair speed. If you unfortunately suffer from the little tanks always tracking the side of your vehicle, or if you hated the fact that you could never really quite fix your vehicle in time and you've already used your small repair kit, then, you know, the 25 extra percent, which also is a non-complex gear, which means you can remove it whenever you wish, is perhaps a good idea for heavy tank vehicles who suffer from track loss a lot. Personally, I find it's not the best of ideas, but that said, I can't help but recommend it, as it's certainly not going to go amiss if you get tracked. Now, on to crew skills. Now, unfortunately, the KV-1S does have a slight issue with the fact that your commander is also the radio operator. So, with regards to what kind of skills I would recommend, I still would recommend you get him 6th Sense as much as possible, if you are intending on keeping this vehicle. Get a random skill that isn't too important, like repairs or firefighting, to 100%, then grab another random skill that isn't too important, bring that up to 40%, because then once you've done that, you can happily drop the skills and then swap them for 6th Sense, which will automatically be at 100%. You won't have to worry about taking a penalty for dropping said skill. After you've got 6th Sense for this vehicle, probably situational awareness, as this will extend the view range. Don't know why a radio operator can do that, but it is very important. Going towards your gunner, you want probably to do something like snapshot or repairs or whatever to sort of get them up to 100%. Then when you get the chance, drop it for Deadeye, as it increases the chance to cause damage to an enemy modules and crew. Not a big chance, mind, but a chance to potentially ammo rack someone, fuel tank explosion, or even still completely screw over the turret, making your opponent useless. So definitely a good idea. For the driver, now because this vehicle is more mobile than the average heavy tank, I would say you can kind of have an option to choose either clutch braking or off-road driving. The clutch braking basically improves your traverse speed, but off-road driving does reduce ground resistance when driving on soft and moderately soft terrain, something like grass over mud or whatever. So when you're in combat, you can potentially drive a little faster, which could save you from either artillery shells or could save you from getting shot in the rear. But then the clutch braking also allows you to turn much faster in order to react to something, so it's a bit of a tit for tat, what you personally would like. Finally, for your loader, I would recommend something as simple as repairs or camo, or probably not camo with a heavy, but, you know, repairs or firefighting, and then probably swap them out for Adrenaline Rush. This basically accelerates gun loading if the vehicle has less than 10% of its hit points left. Now, the opportunities for you to utilize this are not as much as usual, but considering the fact that an extra 10% to your reload is not bad at all, given the circumstance, so you definitely could do with a faster reload. Afterwards, go to repairs or Brothers in Arms or whatever, but generally speaking, Adrenaline Rush is the #1 skill I would recommend for your, perk is the #1 skill I would recommend for your loader. Right, well that's all the talking side of this review done. Let's get into the action with a couple of replays. So here we are in the first game with the KV-85.
Time to roll out.
I am in, obviously, a Tier 8 match on mines. And this hopefully will show how effective this thing is in combat when it's at its worst tier. I was joined by Bidden War. There he is in... Oh, yep, there he is in the M44 artillery. Now, this was an encounter match on mines, but the thing is, when you're at this tier with this particular vehicle, you can't really go towards the objective much. I mean, people were already going towards it, and if you go towards it as a tier 6 vehicle, you're just going to get shot at first. So to start things off, the enemy team decided to have a bit of a major push actually onto the 1-2 line, and if we can just about show, I'm sort of trying to take a position, trying to see if I can get a shot in. I fire, the shell naturally decides to go low. So the first shot of the game is a miss. So taking my time, trying to see if I can go. Enemy AMX decides to charge. Having turned, unfortunately, my shell decides to go a little bit further down and miss the target. Next shot fired actually goes in, which isn't too bad. So moving into position, the SU, right. What I'm going to try and show you here is just how much gun depression you have, right? See, it almost doesn't look like you have it, but if you have a look at the gun, fortunately the view range, the map comes up on that, so I'm just going to show you with the gun here. The gun itself is actually at its lowest gun depression. That's how bad it is. It will feature a little bit more later on in the replay, but I just want to give you an early preview as to what the gun depression is like. That is bad. Extremely bad. Anyway, moving on. Our opponents sort of gain a bit of an early push by knocking out a couple of our scouts and start capturing the base, but luckily we have someone inside. Okay, AMX-13, I fire. Unfortunately, that misses for some reason. Take my time, reload once again. Luckily, someone tracks him. I deliver the killing blow, getting myself a nice little scout tank kill. So at this point, an enemy T-44 Tier 8 tank appears. I just don't have the time to get a shot in. Trying to have a look-see. Oops, and of course the Hellcat behind me is spotted. Luckily, I wasn't spotted for some reason. And taking my time, looking, trying to look for that VK. Of course, it doesn't help that the Hellcat who's behind me is firing. So, trying to find him, and I get a nice kill, or damage roll, and taking my time once again. I try a cheeky shot, but for some reason that shell goes absolutely nowhere. I didn't realise at the time that there was actually a rock behind him. Hellcat once again firing for no reason whatsoever. Unfortunately, Bidden now has passed on. We have actually won a fair amount of ground, though. If you're looking at the mini-map, we've actually won a fair amount of ground on that side. So now it's more just about holding the ground on this side to potentially get in. So once again, I fire another shot. Unfortunately, that one actually goes low into the ground, which is not helpful. But the KV-2 finishes off the VK, and then a T-34-3 and a T-44 arrive as well. Also an M41 Bulldog is making a push. I sort of prepare for a T-34-3 to move up when I spot the Walker Bulldog. Check out that gun depression. Absolutely terrible. Aiming time, fires, hit, do a relatively okay roll. Lower than my average, but, you know, not too bad. Once again, getting into position, waiting for targets. At this point, the game is just close to being mopped up. I looked at the minimap. We were completely decimating them. So now all it is just a matter of pushing and attacking and killing. Fair amount of our team. Bit of a weird replay glitch at the moment, but so there's the KV-13. I try head chance, he shot at him. Obviously that wasn't going to pen, but whatever. Going for the Jagdpanther? No, not really. So now T-44 and the T-34-3 are there. I try and have a look-see. KV shoots and does damage, but the T-34-3 pops out. Right. Better example. Can you see the gun depression? Where is it? That's the gun depression. Just want to highlight that a little bit more. So anyway, T-34-44 does finish off the KV-2, and as such I fire. Unfortunately I couldn't get a nice side shot into the vehicle. I'm trying to take cover. I get set alight, but luckily I saved my tank.
The antenna is damaged. We can only talk locally.
Right, so now is the best example of the gun depression, which is as such. I am less than about 10 meters away. Yeah, I'm about less than 5 meters away from the T-34-3. I am about to fire. This is all that my gun depression can give me. So, when firing, So when I fired, it went into the side of his turret, which meant I started to panic a bit because he could potentially reload for me. I had to back up all the way to here in order to get a shot into him. So that really annoyed me. I was a bit fed up with that, and unfortunately, before I could get a chance to kill, the game was over. So, not the best game in this particular vehicle, but the bit that I wanted to specifically highlight about this gun, I mean, like I said, I did pretty well in combat. This was a tier 8 game, so I wasn't expected to do too much anyway, but I was able to do a fair amount of damage to our opponents from this side, holding it off whilst the rest of our team would proceed down the right-hand flank, completely obliterating anyone here, thus giving us the opportunity to overwhelm whatever was here. So, here are the results of that game. We gained ourselves 22,000 credits, 991 experience, getting a fire for effect, but that's nothing really special, and a mastery class 3rd badge. I did some track damage to our opponent, or to my AMX opponents, and spotted a couple of vehicles, killed 2 of them, and score-wise, didn't do too bad. I ended up... where was I? Oh yeah, well, score-wise, didn't do too bad. Ended up as top 6th, so not too bad. For damage, I did pretty terrible, not gonna lie, but it's to sort of prove the point, if you will. But for experience, I didn't do too bad. I didn't do great, but, you know, at the same time, I did, you know, better than a few other people, and worked with this thing as best as I could in a tier 8 game, mind. So let's go into another tier 8 game to see how effective this thing is in combat. So here we are on the 2nd battle, and we are in another tier 8 game. I am in my KV-85 once more, joined by Bidenwar in his KV-85 and Nimbus in his KV-2. We are on Winterberg, and it is an encounter match. So the first thing we decide to do is charge into the town as to try and go for the little village up here. Not really a good idea in our vehicles, as we probably end up as bigger targets than anything useful. So the Black Prince and ISU decide to try and charge up towards the village as well. So, preliminary start of the game, Bidden decides to advance up into this half of the town, hopefully being able to get into position to get us a couple of cheap shots, well, lucky shots into our opponents. You could call them cheap, you know, it's not that much to fix, not much to pay for a shell. But tish. Anyway, relocating into position. Now, Bidden actually takes cover in this location here to try and avoid artillery, where he suspects is probably firing at around here or around here, so that way he can't actually be shot at. So I'm sort of being a bit overly cautious as well, as I don't really want to be hit by artillery, as the Gewehr Tiger can instantly one-shot me. So, being a little bit more cautious than perhaps usual in this regard. So I don't really do anything until Nimbus decides to go up, and rather than look like a coward, I decide to push up as well. And also to move in to help Bidden, which the KV-4, for some reason, didn't decide to go into it. I get slightly screwed over there by a little bit of terrain. Oops. Now, at first I thought the KV-4 was going to move up to support him, but instead the KV-4 would appear to be going around the flank to do something about those vehicles that Bidden has just spotted. Now, unfortunately, T-71 comes into position. I take my time, aim, 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 aim. Bang! A very lucky RNG shot comes into it, giving him a bit of damage. But before I can get another shot in, he is dead. And then Tiger P comes around the corner. Unfortunately, I'm hit, but sadly now it looks a bit like we're going to be overwhelmed. Now, if you may be wondering where the KV-4 is, he is still behind, not really doing anything and waiting for us to die. So now we're sort of desperately trying to fight our way out of it. I'm trying to go for a weak point. I'm trying to find a bit of cover. It's getting immensely tense. Come on, come on, come on. I want to say Bidden. Okay, he's taken him out. Try and fire. Capola, no, didn't work. And Bidden is sadly taken out. Now it's just myself versus a few enemy tanks. I'm firing at the IS, moving into position for another shot when artillery finishes him off. So even after we've taken down 2 vehicles and broken the backs of our opponents, the KV-4 still doesn't want to enter into the fray. So I try and move up against the Churchill Mark 7, but there are enemy vehicles to my left as well. Getting a nice cheeky shot into the rear of the Churchill Mark 7's turret. Gun depression, however, means I couldn't go in for another shot. Nimbus tries to move into position for a shot. So I, being a bit of a cheeky asshole, decide to pop and steal the kill from him. Now, the rest of the game is a complete rout. We have completely taken out the entire village here, and we're now in the process of destroying enemy vehicles. Now, T-34 over here has taken out the KV-85. I move into position. Now, I don't know whether the T-34 does block me somewhat, but I don't know whether he was doing it on purpose or whether to take cover. I'm going to kind of say he was going to do it to stop me from getting any more damage. T-37 tries to move around. I fire. I get a lucky shot into the back of him when a T-32 is now doing a desperate breakout to try and finish off the last of us, but unfortunately it's completely no hope. Move around. Try and move into position. I try and take a shot. The T-34 fires, doing damage to my friend Nimbus, and unfortunately because he's done that, Nimbus decides to pull back, thus meaning that my shell ricochets off into oblivion, and unfortunately denying me the ability to get a kill from the T-32, which results in his instant death. So, thank you very much, dick of a T-34 driver, and unfortunately, given the circumstances, Nimbus did suffer a bit. Luckily, I didn't penetrate him and do damage, but yeah, thanks a lot, T-34, you dumbass. Anyway, let's go to the results screen for that game. So here are the results of that game. Once again, no major awards, more damage than my hit points, and a second Mastery Badge second class. Did a bit of module damage to my T-71 opponent, tracking him and also damaging his engine, I think. Also doing some damage to the IS and T-37 as well. Now, for damage-wise, I didn't do much. Where am I? Yeah, for damage-wise, I didn't do much. Well, I didn't do badly, getting 1,355. Not too bad, but I ended up getting the most experience of the game, which is pretty cool. I think that was mainly due to the fact that I was a sort of a tier 6 and a tier 8 game. The T-34 twat below me did just got about a little bit much, but yeah, not too bad. In all, it was a pretty okayish game. Unfortunately, it was more of a rout than a game, but that said, it kind of shows the effectiveness of the gun in combat when facing your opponents, and also how the 100 does have that nice rapid fire over the 122. Anyway, guys, let's wrap this thing up in the garage. So, summary time. For me, personally, I think the KV-85 never really stood a chance to be effective. You know, my own personal opinion here. I think because it was directly replacing the KV-1S, I think Wargaming gave it the slant that it would not be as a viable option for World of Tanks players as it used to be. I think they were trying to make it so that many players out there who are looking for a tier 6 heavy tank, they wouldn't instantly go, oh yeah, the KV-1S, because, you know, that's the best one in the game. It's like, they had to, I think what Wargaming did was they made this vehicle unattractive to a fair amount of people, just because then probably to lower the amount of people who were bitching and moaning about it being overpowered, and also probably to spread out the usage of other vehicles as well. So I think those two in mind, this thing was never really going to become an effective heavy. You know, it was. I don't think this vehicle ever personally. I'm going to say it again. Personally, I don't think this vehicle had much of a chance to begin with. I mean, if it was another option in comparison to the KV-1S, maybe we would have seen something different. Maybe we would have had a better gun depression. Maybe we would have had a slightly faster vehicle. Maybe the armor would have been slightly better. You know, you never know. But I think it probably would have fared a little better if it was a separate option. But because it wasn't, and because it was a replacement, it's got to. I guess it feels a bit like it was designed to not look nice. But that said, for me personally, I'm not such a big fan of this vehicle. I mean, it's not shit by any means. It still does a good job. You've got good mobility. The turret armor is very good. If you face your opponents frontally in Tier 6 and stuff matches, make sure that you can bounce them on the sides of it. You'll be able to bounce stuff. You can bounce occasional shots. Unfortunately, not as often as you could in Tier 5, but you can still bounce a couple of things here and there. Your maneuverability in close-up situations can help you out a lot. Especially once you've got 100% crew and all that. You know, there are good things about this tank, but for me personally, she isn't as versatile as I'd like, and that's mainly due to the very, very terrible gun depression that you have with this vehicle. So, yeah, for me, I don't think I'll be keeping this vehicle much longer. But for anyone out there who's grinding for this vehicle, I would say still go through it, because when you're going through it, at least you'll get a sort of a baby perspective as how the ISs work. And then finally, once you've gotten through this vehicle, gotten out the other side, you are rewarded with probably, with exceptions to the Tiger tank, you are probably rewarded with the best Tier 7 heavy tank in the game I've played thus far. You know, you are rewarded at some point. Unfortunately, it has to be at Tier 7 now, but you are rewarded for your determination to reach the higher tiers. So anyway guys, that's it for this review. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this kind of content, feel free to let me know in the comments section down below, clicking on the like button, and of course, subscribing to the channel. If you yourself are a YouTuber, a World of Tanks player, or a World of Tanks player who does YouTube, feel free to let me know if there's anything I could do to improve the next video to make it even better than the last. Thank you very much for watching. This is Crippled signing out. I'll catch you next time.